The universe speaks in whispers, if you know how to listen. Out here, far from city lights, you can see the band of the Milky Way stretching overhead, a river of ancient light, each point a sun, each sun a furnace where atoms are born. And if you could zoom inward, past the air between you and those distant stars, past the molecules of nitrogen and oxygen in your lungs, down to the smallest units of matter that make up everything you see and touch, you would find something remarkable. Atoms are almost entirely empty space, held together by forces we cannot see but can measure with extraordinary precision. An atom is mostly nothing. If you could enlarge the nucleus of a hydrogen atom to the size of a marble, and place it at the centre of a football stadium, the single electron orbiting it would be a speck of dust somewhere high in the stands. Between them, emptiness. Yet this emptiness is not absence. It is governed by the electromagnetic force, one of the four fundamental forces of nature, which binds the negatively charged electron to the positively charged proton, with a strength that has remained constant across 13 billion years. Without this force, matter as we know it could not exist. There would be no stars, no planets, no water, no breath, no thought. Hydrogen was the first atom. In the earliest moments after the Big Bang, when the universe was unimaginably hot and dense, protons and electrons moved freely in a plasma so energetic that no stable structures could form. But as the universe expanded and cooled, roughly 300,000 years after its beginning, electrons began to settle into orbits around protons. Neutral hydrogen atoms filled the cosmos for the first time, and with them came transparency. Light could suddenly travel freely through space. This moment, called recombination, is visible to us still, encoded in the faint microwave radiation that fills the sky in all directions, a kind of cosmic afterglow. From hydrogen, all else follows. Inside the cores of early stars, where temperatures reach 15 million degrees Celsius, hydrogen nuclei collide with enough force to overcome their electromagnetic repulsion and fuse together, forming helium. This process, nuclear fusion, releases energy in the form of light and heat. It is the source of sunlight, and it is also the mechanism by which heavier elements are forged. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, the elements essential to life, are created inside massive stars over millions of years, built up through successive fusion reactions as lighter nuclei combine into heavier ones. When these stars exhaust their fuel and explode in supernovae, they scatter these elements across space, seeding the clouds of gas and dust from which new stars and planets will form. You are made of this material. The calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood, the carbon that forms the backbone of every molecule in your cells, all of it was synthesized in the furnaces of dying stars. This is not metaphor. It is the literal history of the atoms in your body, a history written in the language of nuclear physics and confirmed by spectroscopy, the study of light emitted and absorbed by different elements. When astronomers analyze the light from distant stars, they see the same spectral fingerprints, absorption and emission lines at specific wavelengths that correspond to the elements we find on Earth. The universe, it turns out, is made of the same stuff everywhere. But atoms do not remain isolated. They bond with one another, forming molecules, and it is in these bonds that the complexity of chemistry emerges. When two hydrogen atoms share their electrons with a single oxygen atom, they form water, a molecule with properties that cannot be predicted simply by knowing the properties of hydrogen and oxygen alone. Water is liquid at room temperature, despite being composed of such light elements, because its molecules are polar. The oxygen side carries a slight negative charge, the hydrogen side a slight positive charge, and these opposite charges attract one another, linking water molecules together in a dynamic, shifting network. This is called hydrogen bonding, and it is responsible for water's high boiling point, its ability to dissolve countless substances, and its expansion when frozen, an anomaly that allows ice to float, insulating the liquid water below, and permitting life to survive in frozen lakes. The molecules that make up living organisms are far more complex. A single protein molecule might contain thousands of atoms arranged in precise, three-dimensional configurations. The sequence of amino acids, each a small molecule composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sometimes sulfur, determines how the protein folds, and that folding determines its function. Hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen in your blood, is shaped by the interactions of more than 10,000 atoms. At its centre lies an iron atom, held within a ring-shaped molecule called a heme group. Oxygen binds reversibly to this iron atom, allowing hemoglobin to pick up oxygen in the lungs, where it is abundant, and release it in tissues where it is scarce. This elegant molecular machinery depends entirely on the quantum mechanical properties of electrons orbiting atomic nuclei, properties that allow chemical bonds to form, break, and reform with remarkable selectivity. DNA, the molecule that encodes genetic information, is a double helix composed of two long chains of nucleotides, each nucleotide containing a sugar, a phosphate group, and one of four nitrogenous bases: adenine, thymine, cytosine, or guanine. The bases pair in a highly specific way, adenine with thymine, cytosine with guanine, because their shapes and charge distributions are complementary. These base pairs are held together by hydrogen bonds, the same type of interaction that links water molecules, but here the specificity is absolute. The sequence of bases along one strand determines the sequence along the other, and this complementarity allows DNA to replicate with astonishing fidelity. When a cell divides, enzymes unzip the double helix and use each strand as a template to construct a new partner strand, preserving the genetic information across generations. The forces that hold atoms together, the electromagnetic force operating at the scale of electrons and nuclei, are quantum mechanical in nature. Electrons do not orbit nuclei the way planets orbit stars. Instead, they exist in what are called orbitals, regions of space where the probability of finding an electron is high. These orbitals have specific shapes and energies, determined by the solutions to the Schrödinger equation, the fundamental equation of quantum mechanics. When atoms approach one another, their electron orbitals can overlap, and if the resulting configuration lowers the total energy of the system, a chemical bond forms. This is not a physical tether, but a quantum phenomenon, a shared probability distribution that binds atoms into stable arrangements. The periodic table, devised by Dmitry Mendeleev in 1869, organizes the elements according to the number of protons in their nuclei and the arrangement of electrons in their orbitals. Elements in the same column share similar chemical properties because they have the same number of electrons in their outermost orbital. Sodium and potassium, for example, each have one electron in their outermost shell, and both react vigorously with water, releasing hydrogen gas. Chlorine and bromine, each one electron short of a filled outer shell, are both highly reactive nonmetals. This regularity is not arbitrary. It arises directly from the quantum mechanics governing electron arrangement, a testament to the deep order underlying the diversity of matter. At room temperature, most atoms are in constant motion. In a gas, molecules move freely, colliding billions of times per second. In a liquid, they slide past one another, held loosely by intermolecular forces. In a solid, they vibrate in place, locked into a crystalline lattice or an amorphous network. Even in the apparent stillness of a stone, atoms are trembling, exchanging energy in the form of heat. This thermal motion is a manifestation of entropy, the statistical tendency of energy to spread out, to become more evenly distributed among all possible configurations. It is why heat flows from hot objects to cold ones, why ice melts in warm water, why the universe as a whole is slowly winding down toward a state of maximum disorder. Yet within this slow drift toward equilibrium, life persists, a temporary localized reversal of entropy, sustained by a constant input of energy. plants capture sunlight and use it to build complex molecules from simple ones, assembling carbon dioxide and water into sugars. Animals consume these molecules, breaking them down and harvesting the stored energy to power the molecular machines inside their cells. Every breath you take, every thought you think, every movement you make is driven by the controlled breaking and forming of chemical bonds, a cascade of atomic rearrangements orchestrated by proteins, powered by the same nuclear fusion that lights the stars. The quiet life of atoms, then, is not so quiet. It is a story of forces and fields, of probabilities and symmetries, of matter organizing itself into increasingly complex forms. From hydrogen in the void to the neurons firing in your brain as you read these words, the universe has been building, one atom at a time, structures capable of contemplating their own existence. We are, in a very real sense, the universe looking back at itself, a collection of atoms, forged in stars, arranged by chemistry and evolution, into a form that can ask questions and seek answers. This is the foundation. Every phenomenon in the natural world, from the colour of a sunset to the replication of DNA, rests on the behaviour of atoms and the forces that bind them. Understanding this is not just a matter of intellectual curiosity. It is a way of seeing the deep continuity between ourselves and the cosmos, a recognition that we're not separate from nature, but woven into its fabric at the most fundamental level. There is a rhythm to the universe that governs everything from the swing of pendulums to the orbits of planets. It is visible in the waves that cross an ocean, in the oscillation of a plucked guitar string, in the pulsing of light itself. This rhythm, periodic motion, is one of the most fundamental patterns in nature, and it emerges wherever energy moves back and forth between different forms. Consider a simple pendulum, a weight suspended from a fixed point, pulled to one side and released. Gravity pulls it downward, accelerating it toward the centre. As it swings through the lowest point, it has converted all its potential energy into kinetic energy, the energy of motion. But momentum carries it upward on the other side, where it slows, stops, and reverses direction. The cycle repeats, tracing an arc through space with a period determined by the length of the string and the strength of gravity. This is harmonic motion, and it describes not just pendulums, but springs, molecules, and even the vibrations of atoms in a solid. The same mathematics that describes a pendulum also describes light. In the 19th century, James Clerk Maxwell unified electricity and magnetism into a single framework, demonstrating that light is an electromagnetic wave, a self-propagating oscillation of electric and magnetic fields moving through space at roughly 300,000 kilometers per second. The colour of light depends on its wavelength. Red light has a wavelength of about 700 nanometers, blue light about 450. These are the scales at which atoms and molecules interact with light, absorbing and emitting photons when electrons transition between energy levels. When sunlight passes through a prism, it separates into a spectrum of colours because different wavelengths are bent by different amounts as they enter and exit the glass. This dispersion reveals that white light is not pure but composite, a mixture of all visible wavelengths. When that same sunlight encounters an atom, something more specific happens. An electron orbiting the nucleus can absorb a photon, but only if the photon's energy matches exactly the energy difference between two allowed electron orbitals. If the match is precise, the electron jumps to a higher orbital. If not, the photon passes by unaffected. This selectivity is why hydrogen gas glows pink when heated. It emits photons at specific wavelengths, corresponding to the energy gaps between its electron orbitals, producing the characteristic spectral lines astronomers use to identify hydrogen in distant stars. Sound, too, is a wave, but it moves through matter rather than empty space. When you strike a tuning fork, the metal vibrates, compressing and rarefying the air around it in regular pulses. These pressure waves travel outward at about 343 meters per second at sea level, much slower than light. Your eardrum responds to these oscillations, converting them into mechanical motion that is transmitted through 3 tiny bones in the middle ear to the fluid-filled cochlea, where thousands of hair cells bend in response to specific frequencies, triggering neural signals that your brain interprets as sound. The pitch you perceive corresponds to the frequency of the wave, the number of oscillations per second measured in hertz. Middle C on a piano vibrates at 262 hertz. The lowest note a healthy young adult can hear is around 20 hertz. The highest, around 20,000. All waves share certain behaviors. They can reflect, bouncing off surfaces like light from a mirror or sound from a canyon wall. They can refract, bending as they pass from one medium to another, which is why a straw in a glass of water appears broken at the surface. They can interfere, combining constructively where their peaks align, or destructively where a peak meets a trough. This interference is responsible for the iridescent colours in soap bubbles and oil slicks, thin films where light waves reflecting from the top and bottom surfaces overlap, reinforcing some wavelengths while cancelling others. Quantum mechanics reveals that matter itself exhibits wave-like properties. In 1924, Louis de Broglie proposed that particles such as electrons have an associated wavelength, inversely proportional to their momentum. This was confirmed experimentally when electrons passing through a crystal produced a diffraction pattern, alternating bands of intensity characteristic of waves passing through a grating. An electron is not simply a particle moving along a defined path. It is described by a wave function, a mathematical object that encodes the probabilities of finding the electron at different locations. When you measure the electron's position, the wave function collapses to a specific outcome, but before measurement the electron exists in a superposition of possibilities. This wave-particle duality is not a limitation of our understanding, but a fundamental feature of reality at small scales. Photons, too, exhibit both particle and wave characteristics. In some experiments, such as the photoelectric effect, where light striking a metal surface ejects electrons, photons behave like discrete packets of energy. In others, such as the double slit experiment, they produce interference patterns characteristic of waves. The same photon can pass through 2 slits simultaneously, interfering with itself to create a pattern of light and dark bands on a screen. If you attempt to determine which slit the photon passed through, the interference pattern disappears and the photons behave like particles. The act of measurement changes the outcome, not because of experimental clumsiness, but because measurement is an interaction that fundamentally alters the system being observed. The uncertainty principle, formulated by Werner Heisenberg in 1927, formalizes this limitation. It states that certain pairs of properties, such as position and momentum, cannot both be known with arbitrary precision. The more precisely you determine a particle's position, the less precisely you can know its momentum, and vice versa. This is not a statement about measurement error, but about the nature of reality itself. A particle does not have a definite position and momentum simultaneously. These properties are complementary aspects of a quantum state, and measuring one disturbs the other. Wave phenomena extend beyond the quantum realm. The tides that rise and fall along coastlines twice each day are driven by the gravitational pull of the moon, and to a lesser extent, the sun. As the Earth rotates beneath these gravitational influences, the ocean's surface deforms, creating bulges on the side facing the moon and on the opposite side. The period of the tide depends on the Earth's rotation and the moon's orbit, which is why high tide occurs roughly every 12 hours and 25 minutes. The amplitude depends on the alignment of the Earth, moon, and sun. Spring tides occur when all three are aligned, amplifying the effect, while neap tides occur when they form a right angle, partially cancelling it. Even the expansion of the universe exhibits wave-like features. In the early universe, tiny quantum fluctuations in the density of matter were stretched to cosmic scales by inflation. a brief period of exponential expansion that occurred a fraction of a second after the Big Bang. These fluctuations acted as seeds for the formation of galaxies, and their signature is imprinted in the cosmic microwave background radiation as small variations in temperature across the sky. Analyzing these variations reveals the geometry of space, the composition of the universe, and the initial conditions from which all large-scale structure emerged. Oscillations appear in biology as well. Your heart beats in a regular rhythm, driven by pacemaker cells in the sinoatrial node that depolarize spontaneously, triggering a wave of electrical activity that spreads through the heart muscle, causing it to contract. The circadian rhythm, your body's internal clock, oscillates with a period of roughly 24 hours, regulated by a cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. These neurons receive light signals from the retina and synchronize the body's physiological processes to the cycle of day and night, influencing sleep, body temperature, hormone release, and metabolism. The universality of waves and oscillations points to a deeper truth. The laws of physics are the same everywhere and at all times. The equations that describe a vibrating string or a swinging pendulum apply equally to the oscillations of electromagnetic fields, the quantum states of atoms, and the dynamics of populations in ecosystems. This mathematical unity suggests that beneath the apparent diversity of phenomena, there are fundamental principles at work, symmetries, conservation laws, and geometric relationships that structure the behavior of the cosmos. Understanding these principles does not diminish the wonder of experience. Knowing that music is a pattern of pressure waves in air does not make it less beautiful. Recognizing that color arises from the quantum leaps of electrons does not render a sunset less moving. If anything, the knowledge deepens appreciation, revealing the intricate connections between what we perceive and the underlying reality that gives rise to it. We live in a universe that is both intelligible and astonishing, where the same laws that govern the flickering of a candle flame also guide the formation of stars. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. This is the first law of thermodynamics, and it is among the most rigorously tested principles in all of science. Energy can change forms, kinetic to potential, chemical to thermal, electrical to radiant, but the total amount remains constant. When you lift a book from the floor to a shelf, you do work against gravity, transferring energy from your muscles into the gravitational field. That energy is stored as potential energy, ready to be converted back into kinetic energy if the book falls. The second law of thermodynamics introduces directionality to these transformations. It states that in any isolated system, entropy, a measure of disorder or the number of possible microscopic configurations, tends to increase over time. This is why heat flows spontaneously from hot objects to cold ones, but never the reverse, why gases expand to fill a container, but do not spontaneously compress into a corner, why broken eggs do not reassemble themselves. The universe is moving irreversibly toward a state of maximum entropy, where energy is spread as evenly as possible and no further work can be extracted. Yet this increase in entropy does not prevent the emergence of order. The second law applies to isolated systems, but most systems we encounter are not isolated. They exchange energy and matter with their surroundings. A refrigerator decreases the entropy of its interior by pumping heat outward, but in doing so, it increases the entropy of the room by a greater amount. The total entropy still increases. Life operates on the same principle. Living organisms are highly ordered structures, maintaining themselves far from equilibrium by consuming energy, either from sunlight in the case of plants, or from chemical bonds in food in the case of animals. The order within a living cell is sustained by exporting entropy to the environment, primarily in the form of heat. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants capture solar energy and use it to build complex organic molecules from simple inorganic ones. In the chloroplasts of plant cells, chlorophyll molecules absorb photons of red and blue light, exciting electrons to higher energy states. These energized electrons are passed through a series of protein complexes embedded in the chloroplast membrane, driving the synthesis of ATP adenosine triphosphate, a molecule that stores energy in the bonds between its phosphate groups. The energy in ATP is then used to power the Calvin cycle, a series of chemical reactions that fix carbon dioxide from the air into glucose, a sugar molecule that serves as a building block for cellulose, starches, and other carbohydrates. Animals reverse this process. In cellular respiration, glucose is broken down in the presence of oxygen, releasing the stored energy. This occurs in the mitochondria, often called the powerhouses of the cell. Glucose is first split into smaller molecules in a process called glycolysis, which occurs in the cytoplasm and produces a small amount of ATP. The resulting molecules then enter the mitochondria, where they are further broken down in the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle. This cycle strips electrons from carbon atoms, transferring them to carrier molecules that shuttle them to the electron transport chain, a series of proteins embedded in the inner mitochondrial membrane. As electrons move through this chain, they release energy used to pump protons across the membrane, creating a concentration gradient. When protons flow back through a protein called ATP synthase, the energy drives the synthesis of ATP. Oxygen serves as the final electron acceptor, combining with electrons and protons to form water. ATP is the universal energy currency of life. Nearly every active process in a cell, protein synthesis, muscle contraction, nerve impulse transmission, DNA replication, is powered by the hydrolysis of ATP, which releases energy by breaking the bond between the second and third phosphate groups. A typical human produces and consumes roughly their own body weight in ATP each day, a testament to the constant flow of energy required to maintain the organized complexity of living systems. Entropy also explains why time has a direction. At the microscopic level, the laws of physics are time-symmetric. If you watch a video of billiard balls colliding and reverse it, the motion still obeys Newton's laws. But at the macroscopic level, time's arrow is unmistakable. Ice cubes melt in warm water. They do not spontaneously form. Perfume diffuses through a room. It does not collect back into the bottle. These processes are not forbidden by energy conservation. They are forbidden by the statistical improbability of entropy spontaneously decreasing. The second law does not make it impossible for entropy to decrease locally or temporarily, only so overwhelmingly unlikely that it never happens on observable scales. The relationship between energy and mass, revealed by Einstein's equation E equals mc squared, demonstrates that mass is itself a form of energy. In nuclear reactions, small amounts of mass are converted into enormous amounts of energy, because the speed of light squared is such a large number. When a uranium nucleus splits in nuclear fission, the combined mass of the resulting fragments is slightly less than the mass of the original nucleus. The missing mass has been converted into kinetic energy of the fragments and gamma radiation. Similarly, in nuclear fusion, when hydrogen nuclei combine to form helium inside the Sun, the mass of the helium nucleus is less than the total mass of the hydrogen nuclei that fused. The difference is released as energy, sustaining the Sun's luminosity for billions of years. Energy density determines much about the structure of the universe. Stars form where clouds of gas become dense enough for gravity to overcome thermal pressure, collapsing inward until the core temperature reaches the point where nuclear fusion ignites. The balance between gravitational collapse and outward pressure from fusion reactions stabilizes the star, defining its size, temperature, and lifetime. More massive stars burn hotter and faster, exhausting their fuel in millions of years, while smaller stars like our Sun can shine steadily for 10 billion years. The most massive stars end their lives in supernova explosions, events so energetic they briefly outshine entire galaxies, forging heavy elements in the intense heat and scattering them into space. On Earth, energy flow shapes ecosystems. Sunlight is captured by primary producers, plants, algae, and some bacteria. and converted into chemical energy stored in organic molecules. Herbivores consume these producers, extracting some of the stored energy for their own metabolism. Carnivores consume herbivores, and decomposers break down the remains of all organisms, releasing nutrients back into the soil and atmosphere. At each step, much of the energy is dissipated as heat, which is why food chains rarely extend beyond 4 or 5 trophic levels. There simply is not enough usable energy remaining to support higher levels of organization. The flow of energy also governs climate. Solar radiation heats the Earth's surface unevenly, more at the equator, less at the poles, creating temperature differences that drive atmospheric and oceanic circulation. Warm air rises at the equator, cools as it moves toward the poles, and sinks, creating convection cells that redistribute heat around the planet. Ocean currents, driven by differences in temperature and salinity, transport vast amounts of thermal energy across the globe, moderating climates and influencing weather patterns. The greenhouse effect, caused by gases such as carbon dioxide and water vapour that absorb and re-emit infrared radiation, traps some of the heat that would otherwise escape to space, warming the planet's surface. Without this effect, Earth's average temperature would be well below freezing, and life as we know it would not exist. Energy transformations are everywhere, subtle and constant. When you walk, chemical energy stored in glucose is converted into mechanical energy by muscle fibers, which contract when filaments of actin and myosin slide past one another, powered by ATP. Some energy is lost as heat, warming your body. When you think, neurons fire, propagating electrical signals along their length by opening and closing ion channels, a process that also requires ATP. Even at rest, your body consumes energy, maintaining body temperature, repairing tissues, synthesizing proteins, transmitting nerve impulses. This baseline energy expenditure, the basal metabolic rate, accounts for roughly 60 to 70% of the calories you burn each day. The concept of energy unifies disparate phenomena under a single framework. Whether you are considering the motion of planets, the growth of a tree, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, or the electrical activity of your brain, you're observing energy in various forms, transforming and flowing according to the same fundamental principles. These principles are not arbitrary human inventions, but reflections of deep symmetries in the laws of nature. Energy conservation arises from the fact that the laws of physics do not change over time. Momentum conservation arises from the fact that they do not change from place to place. These symmetries, formalized by mathematician Emmy Noether in the early 20th century, reveal a profound connection between the structure of physical law and the quantities that remain constant as the universe evolves. Gravity shapes everything. It pulls raindrops toward the ground, holds the moon in orbit around the Earth, binds galaxies into clusters spanning millions of light years. Of the 4 fundamental forces, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force, gravity is by far the weakest. A small refrigerator magnet can overcome the gravitational pull of the entire Earth when it lifts a paperclip. Yet gravity dominates at large scales because it acts on mass, and mass is always positive. Unlike electric charge, which can be positive or negative and tends to cancel out over large volumes, mass accumulates, and so does its gravitational influence. Newton described gravity as a force that acts instantaneously across empty space, proportional to the product of 2 masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. This law, published in 1687, explained the motion of the planets with extraordinary precision and stood unchallenged for more than 2 centuries. But it left a question unanswered. How does gravity act across the void? What mechanism transmits the force from one mass to another? Einstein answered this in 1915 with general relativity, a theory that reconceives gravity not as a force, but as a curvature of space-time itself. Mass and energy warp the fabric of space-time, and objects moving through this curved geometry follow paths called geodesics, the straightest possible routes in a curved space. A planet orbiting a star is not being pulled by a force emanating from the star. It is moving freely through space-time that has been bent by the star's mass. The planet follows a curved path for the same reason a ball rolling on a stretched rubber sheet curves toward a heavy object placed at the centre. The geometry of the surface dictates the motion. This curvature affects not only the paths of objects, but also the passage of time. Clocks run slower in stronger gravitational fields, a phenomenon called gravitational time dilation. An astronaut orbiting Earth ages slightly faster than someone on the surface, because the gravitational field is weaker in orbit. This is not a malfunction of clocks, but a property of time itself. Time is not absolute. It is woven together with space into a four-dimensional continuum, and both can be stretched, compressed, and warped by the presence of mass and energy. Gravitational time dilation has been measured with extraordinary precision. In 1971, physicists flew atomic clocks around the world on commercial airplanes and compared them to identical clocks that remained on the ground. The flying clocks, experiencing weaker gravity at altitude, gained nanoseconds relative to the stationary ones, exactly as predicted by general relativity. Today, the Global Positioning System must account for this effect. GPS satellites orbit at about 20,000 kilometers, where gravity is weaker and time runs faster than on Earth's surface. If the system did not correct for this difference, position errors would accumulate at a rate of several kilometers per day, rendering the system useless. Gravity also bends light. Although photons have no mass, they carry energy, and energy contributes to space-time curvature just as mass does. When light passes near a massive object, it follows the curved space-time, causing its path to deflect. This was confirmed in 1919 during a solar eclipse, when stars near the sun's edge appeared shifted from their usual positions. The starlight had been bent as it grazed the sun, validating Einstein's prediction and marking one of the pivotal moments in the history of physics. This bending of light enables gravitational lensing, a phenomenon astronomers use to study distant galaxies and search for dark matter. When light from a distant galaxy passes through a massive foreground object, a galaxy cluster for instance, the cluster's gravity bends the light, magnifying and distorting the image of the background galaxy. Sometimes multiple images appear, arranged in arcs or even complete rings around the lensing mass. By analysing these distortions, astronomers can map the distribution of mass in the foreground object, including mass that does not emit light. Dark matter, which makes up roughly 27% of the universe's total mass energy, reveals itself primarily through its gravitational effects. It does not absorb, emit, or reflect light, making it invisible to telescopes, but its presence is inferred from the motion of stars and gas in galaxies. Stars in the outer regions of spiral galaxies orbit faster than they should if only visible matter were present. The excess speed implies the existence of additional mass distributed in a halo around the galaxy. Similarly, galaxy clusters contain far more gravitational mass than can be accounted for by their visible stars and gas. The nature of dark matter remains one of the great unsolved problems in physics, but its gravitational signature is unmistakable. Black holes represent the most extreme warping of space-time. When a massive star exhausts its nuclear fuel, it can no longer generate the outward pressure needed to counteract gravity. The core collapses catastrophically, and if the remaining mass exceeds about 3 times the mass of the Sun, nothing can halt the collapse. The matter compresses into a region of infinite density called a singularity, surrounded by an event horizon, a boundary beyond which the escape velocity exceeds the speed of light. Anything crossing the event horizon, including light itself, cannot escape. The black hole becomes a one-way surface in space-time. Near a black hole, time dilation becomes extreme. An observer watching someone fall toward a black hole would see them slow down as they approach the event horizon, their movements growing more sluggish, light from them shifting toward red as it climbs out of the deepening gravitational well. To the falling observer, however, time proceeds normally. They would cross the event horizon in finite time, unaware of the boundary until it was too late. Inside, space-time is so severely curved that all paths lead inexorably toward the singularity. The future becomes a direction in space, and no amount of acceleration can prevent arrival at the centre. Black holes are not entirely black. Stephen Hawking showed in 1974 that quantum effects near the event horizon cause black holes to emit radiation, a process now known as Hawking radiation. Virtual particle-antiparticle pairs constantly appear and annihilate in empty space, a consequence of the uncertainty principle. Near a black hole's event horizon, one member of a pair can fall into the black hole while the other escapes, carrying away energy. Over immense timescales, this radiation causes the black hole to lose mass and eventually evaporate. For a black hole with the mass of the Sun, this process would take about 10 to the 67th power years, far longer than the current age of the universe. But the principle stands: black holes are not eternal. Gravitational waves, predicted by Einstein and detected for the first time in 2015, are ripples in space-time itself, produced when massive objects accelerate. When two black holes spiral toward each other and merge, they release enormous amounts of energy in the form of gravitational waves, distortions in the fabric of space-time that propagate outward at the speed of light. These waves stretch and compress space as they pass, altering the distance between objects by minuscule amounts. The Laser Interferometer, Gravitational Wave Observatory, LIGO, detects these changes by splitting a laser beam and sending it down two perpendicular arms, each 4 kilometers long. When a gravitational wave passes through, it changes the length of one arm relative to the other by a distance smaller than the width of a proton. The interference pattern of the recombined beams reveals the passage of the wave. The detection of gravitational waves opened a new way of observing the universe. Unlike light, which can be absorbed or scattered by matter, gravitational waves pass through everything unimpeded, carrying information about events that would otherwise be invisible. The collisions of black holes and neutron stars, the vibrations of supernova cores, even faint echoes from the Big Bang itself, all can be studied through the gravitational waves they produce. Gravity binds the cosmos into structure. Without it, matter would disperse uniformly through space, and there would be no stars, no planets, no galaxies. The slight variations in density present in the early universe, amplified by gravity over billions of years, grew into the large-scale structure we see today, a cosmic web of filaments and voids, with galaxies concentrated along the filaments like beads on a string. Gravity pulls matter together, but dark energy, a mysterious component that makes up about 68% of the universe's mass energy, pushes space itself apart, accelerating the expansion of the universe. The interplay between these two forces will determine the ultimate fate of the cosmos, whether it expands forever, gradually cooling and darkening, or eventually reverses and collapses back on itself. Gravity is patient. It works slowly, over vast scales of time and space, but its effects are inexorable. Every object with mass contributes to the curvature of space-time, and every particle, every photon, every ripple in the fabric of reality responds to that curvature. We live within this geometry, shaped by the mass of the Earth beneath us, the Sun around which we orbit, the galaxy in which the Sun resides, and the distant structures that define the large-scale architecture of the universe. Gravity is not separate from us. It is part of the structure of existence, as fundamental as time itself. There is a network inside you more complex than any diagram can fully capture. 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others, form a web of communication that processes sensory information, generates thoughts, stores memories, and coordinates every action your body takes. This is the nervous system, and it operates through a combination of electrical signals and chemical messengers, a language refined over hundreds of millions of years of evolution. A neuron is a specialized cell with a structure adapted for transmitting information. It has a cell body containing the nucleus and the machinery for protein synthesis, dendrites that branch out to receive signals from other neurons, and a single axon that carries signals away, sometimes over distances as long as a meter. At rest, the neuron maintains a voltage difference across its membrane, about -70 millivolts inside relative to outside, by actively pumping sodium ions out and potassium ions in. This resting potential is maintained by proteins called ion pumps, which consume ATP to move ions against their concentration gradients. When a neuron receives sufficient stimulation from its neighbours, voltage-gated sodium channels in the membrane open, allowing sodium ions to rush inward. This depolarizes the membrane, and if the voltage crosses a threshold, an action potential is triggered. A rapid, all-or-nothing electrical spike that propagates down the axon at speeds ranging from 1 to 100 meters per second, depending on the axon's diameter and whether it is insulated with myelin, a fatty sheath that increases conduction speed. The action potential travels without diminishing in strength, regenerating itself at each point along the axon, ensuring that the signal reaches its destination with full fidelity. At the end of the axon, the electrical signal must be converted into a chemical one. The axon terminates at a synapse, a narrow gap separating it from the next neuron. When the action potential arrives, it triggers the release of neurotransmitters, small molecules stored in vesicles within the axon terminal. These molecules diffuse across the synaptic cleft, a distance of about 20 nanometers, and bind to receptors on the membrane of the receiving neuron. Depending on the type of neurotransmitter and receptor, this binding can either excite the receiving neuron, making it more likely to fire an action potential, or inhibit it, making it less likely. The outcome depends on the sum of all excitatory and inhibitory signals converging on the neuron at any given moment. There are dozens of different neurotransmitters, each with specific roles. Glutamate is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain, involved in learning and memory. GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter, helping to balance neural activity and prevent excessive firing. Dopamine modulates reward, motivation, and movement. Its deficiency is associated with Parkinson's disease. Serotonin influences mood, appetite, and sleep. Many antidepressant medications work by altering serotonin levels in the synaptic cleft. Acetylcholine plays a role in attention, arousal, and muscle contraction. Each neurotransmitter binds to specific receptors, and the diversity of receptors allows for a remarkable variety of responses, even with a limited set of signaling molecules. The brain is organized into regions with specialized functions, though these regions work in concert rather than in isolation. The cerebral cortex, the outer layer of the brain, is divided into lobes. The frontal lobe is involved in planning, decision-making, and voluntary movement. The parietal lobe processes sensory information related to touch, temperature, and spatial awareness. The temporal lobe handles auditory processing and is critical for memory formation, particularly through a structure called the hippocampus. The occipital lobe is dedicated to vision. Beneath the cortex lie structures such as the thalamus, which relays sensory information to the cortex, and the hypothalamus, which regulates hunger, thirst, body temperature, and circadian rhythms. Memory is not stored in a single location but distributed across the brain in patterns of synaptic connections. When you learn something new, the strength of certain synapses increases, a process called long-term potentiation. Neurons that fire together strengthen their connections, while those that do not weaken over time. This principle, often summarized as neurons that fire together wire together, underlies much of learning and memory. The hippocampus is essential for forming new memories, particularly episodic memories, memories of specific events and experiences. Damage to the hippocampus, as occurred in the famous case of patient HM, results in an inability to form new long-term memories, though older memories and procedural skills often remain intact. The brain consumes a disproportionate amount of energy relative to its size. In an adult human, the brain accounts for about 2% of body weight, but uses roughly 20% of the body's total energy expenditure. Most of this energy is devoted to maintaining the ion gradients that enable neurons to fire and to synthesizing neurotransmitters. Even at rest, the brain is highly active, with networks of neurons engaging in spontaneous coordinated activity. This baseline activity, sometimes called the default mode network, is thought to be involved in self-referential thinking, memory consolidation, and preparation for future tasks. Sleep is essential for brain function, though the reasons are complex and not fully understood. During sleep, the brain cycles through different stages, each characterized by distinct patterns of electrical activity measured by electroencephalography, or EEG. Non-REM sleep, which includes stages of progressively deeper sleep, is marked by slow, synchronized waves of neural activity. REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, is characterized by fast, desynchronized brain activity similar to waking, along with vivid dreams and temporary paralysis of most voluntary muscles. Sleep appears to play a critical role in memory consolidation, transferring information from short-term to long-term storage, and in clearing metabolic waste products that accumulate in the brain during waking hours. The glymphatic system, discovered in recent years, is a network of channels that facilitates the removal of waste from the brain. Cerebrospinal fluid flows along pathways surrounding blood vessels, flushing out proteins and other byproducts of neural activity. This process is most active during sleep, suggesting one reason why sleep deprivation impairs cognitive function. Chronic sleep disruption has been linked to increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, in which abnormal proteins accumulate in the brain, forming plaques and tangles that interfere with neural function. Consciousness, the subjective experience of being aware, remains one of the deepest puzzles in neuroscience. How does the electrochemical activity of neurons give rise to the felt quality of experience, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the sense of self? There is no consensus on the answer. Some theories propose that consciousness arises from the integration of information across distributed brain networks. Others suggest it depends on specific types of neural activity, such as synchronized oscillations at particular frequencies. Still others argue that consciousness may require quantum processes occurring within neurons, though this remains speculative and controversial. What is clear is that consciousness depends on the integrity of certain brain structures. Damage to the brainstem, which regulates arousal and wakefulness, can result in coma. Damage to the cortex can impair specific aspects of conscious experience. Patients with visual cortex lesions may be unable to see, even though their eyes function normally. Patients with damage to language areas may lose the ability to speak or comprehend speech while retaining other cognitive abilities. Consciousness appears to be a product of coordinated activity across many regions, rather than the function of any single area. The nervous system extends beyond the brain. The spinal cord transmits signals between the brain and the rest of the body, and it also mediates reflexes, rapid, automatic responses that do not require conscious processing. When you touch a hot surface, sensory neurons in your skin send signals to the spinal cord, which immediately activates motor neurons that contract muscles and pull your hand away. This reflex loop bypasses the brain, allowing a faster response. The peripheral nervous system includes the somatic nervous system, which controls voluntary movements, and the autonomic nervous system, which regulates involuntary functions such as heart rate, digestion, and respiration. The autonomic nervous system has two main divisions: the sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic division prepares the body for action, the fight or flight response. It increases heart rate, dilates airways, redirects blood flow to muscles, and releases adrenaline. The parasympathetic division promotes rest and digestion, slowing the heart, stimulating digestion, and conserving energy. These systems work in balance, adjusting the body's state in response to changing demands. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, persists throughout life, though it is most pronounced during development. Children's brains are remarkably adaptable, capable of recovering from injuries that would cause permanent deficits in adults. Even in adulthood, learning new skills, practicing mindfulness, or engaging in physical exercise can induce structural changes in the brain, increasing the volume of certain regions and the density of synaptic connections. This adaptability is both a strength and a vulnerability. The same plasticity that allows the brain to learn and recover also makes it susceptible to maladaptive changes, as seen in chronic pain syndromes, where persistent pain signals can rewire neural circuits, amplifying the perception of pain even after the initial injury is healed. The human brain is the product of evolution, shaped by natural selection over hundreds of millions of years. Its basic architecture is shared with other vertebrates, but it has been elaborated and refined in ways that enable language, abstract thought, and culture. The neocortex, the most recently evolved part of the brain, is disproportionately large in humans and is responsible for many of the cognitive abilities that distinguish us from other species. Yet we retain older structures, the limbic system, involved in emotion and motivation, the cerebellum, which coordinates movement, the brainstem, which regulates vital functions. These ancient systems interact with the newer ones, producing the rich, sometimes contradictory tapestry of human experience. Life is a chemical process, but it is chemistry of extraordinary complexity and precision. Every living cell is a microscopic factory, continuously synthesizing thousands of different molecules, breaking others down, transporting materials across membranes, sensing its environment, and responding to signals. All of this is orchestrated by proteins, molecules that catalyze reactions, build structures, carry cargo, defend against invaders, and transmit information. The instructions for making these proteins are encoded in DNA, a molecule that has preserved and transmitted genetic information across billions of years of evolution. DNA is a polymer, a long chain composed of repeating units called nucleotides. Each nucleotide consists of a sugar molecule, a phosphate group, and one of 4 nitrogenous bases: adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine, or guanine. The sequence of these bases along the DNA strand constitutes the genetic code. 3 consecutive bases, a codon, specify a single amino acid, and a series of codons specifies the sequence of amino acids in a protein. There are 64 possible codons, but only 20 standard amino acids, so the code is redundant. Multiple codons can encode the same amino acid. This redundancy provides some protection against mutations, as changes in the third position of a codon often do not alter the resulting protein. The process of gene expression begins with transcription, in which an enzyme called RNA polymerase binds to a specific region of DNA called a promoter, and synthesizes a complementary strand of messenger RNA, or RNA. This mRNA is a temporary copy of the gene's instructions, and in eukaryotic cells it undergoes further processing. Sections called introns are removed, and the remaining segments called exons are spliced together. The mature mRNA then travels from the nucleus to the cytoplasm, where it is translated into protein by ribosomes, large molecular machines composed of ribosomal RNA and proteins. Translation occurs in 3 stages: initiation, elongation, and termination. During initiation, the ribosome assembles around the mRNA and finds the start codon, usually AUG, which codes for the amino acid methionine. Transfer RNA molecules, each carrying a specific amino acid, recognize codons on the mRNA through complementary base pairing. As the ribosome moves along the mRNA, it links amino acids together in the order specified by the codons, forming a growing polypeptide chain. When the ribosome reaches a stop codon, the chain is released and folds into its functional three-dimensional shape. This folding is guided by the chemical properties of the amino acids. Hydrophobic residues tend to cluster in the interior, away from water, while hydrophilic residues remain on the surface. Proteins perform an astonishing variety of functions. Enzymes accelerate chemical reactions by stabilizing the transition state, lowering the activation energy required for the reaction to proceed. Without enzymes, most biochemical reactions would occur far too slowly to sustain life. Structural proteins like collagen provide mechanical support in tissues. Motor proteins such as myosin and kinesin generate force and movement, either by contracting muscle fibers or by transporting cargo along cellular highways called microtubules. Antibodies recognize and bind to foreign molecules, marking them for destruction by the immune system. Hemoglobin transports oxygen in the blood. Rhodopsin in the retina responds to light, initiating the cascade of signals that results in vision. Mutations, changes in the DNA sequence, are the raw material of evolution. They arise spontaneously through errors in DNA replication, exposure to radiation or chemicals, or the activity of mobile genetic elements called transposons. Most mutations are neutral, having no effect on the organism's fitness. Some are harmful, disrupting essential proteins or regulatory sequences. A few are beneficial, conferring an advantage that increases the likelihood of survival and reproduction. Over generations, natural selection acts on this variation, increasing the frequency of beneficial alleles and decreasing the frequency of harmful ones. The mechanisms of evolution are well understood. Populations evolve when individuals with certain traits leave more offspring than others, and those traits are heritable. Darwin called this process natural selection, and it operates whenever there is variation, inheritance, and differential reproductive success. Sexual selection, a special case of natural selection, favors traits that increase mating success, even if they reduce survival. Peacock tails and antlers are examples. Genetic drift, random changes in allele frequencies, also plays a role, particularly in small populations, where chance events can have large effects. Evolution has no foresight and no goal. It is not a process of improvement toward perfection, but adaptation to local conditions. Organisms are not optimally designed, but rather bear the marks of their evolutionary history, including vestigial structures, inefficient pathways, and vulnerabilities that arise from constraints imposed by ancestry. The human eye, for instance, has a blind spot where the optic nerve passes through the retina, because photoreceptor cells are oriented backward, with their light-sensitive ends facing away from incoming light. This arrangement is an accident of evolutionary history, retained because once established, it was difficult to reverse. All life on Earth shares a common ancestry, a conclusion supported by multiple lines of evidence. The genetic code is nearly universal. The same codons specify the same amino acids in bacteria, fungi, plants, and animals, suggesting they all inherited this system from a common ancestor. The fundamental biochemical pathways, glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, DNA replication, are conserved across all domains of life. The structure of ribosomal RNA, which evolves slowly, can be used to construct a tree of life showing the relationships among species. This tree reveals that life is divided into three major branches: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Humans belong to eukarya, a group characterized by cells with nuclei and membrane-bound organelles. Mitochondria, the organelles that produce ATP in eukaryotic cells, were once free-living bacteria. Around 2 billion years ago, an ancestral eukaryotic cell engulfed a bacterium capable of aerobic respiration, and instead of digesting it, the host cell formed a symbiotic relationship. The bacterium provided ATP, and the host provided nutrients and protection. Over time, the bacterium lost many of its genes, transferring others to the host's nucleus, and became integrated as an organelle. Mitochondria still retain their own small circular genomes and reproduce independently within the cell, evidence of their bacterial origin. Chloroplasts, the organelles in plant cells that perform photosynthesis, have a similar history, originating from cyanobacteria. The diversity of life is staggering. Estimates suggest there are between 8 and 10 million species on Earth, though only about 2 million have been formally described. This diversity arose through the branching process of speciation, in which populations diverge over time until they can no longer interbreed. Geographic isolation often initiates speciation. Populations separated by mountains, rivers, or distance accumulate different mutations and adaptations. When reproductive isolation is complete, they are considered separate species. Adaptive radiation, the rapid diversification of a lineage into many species exploiting different ecological niches, has occurred repeatedly, such as in the finches of the Galapagos Islands. Each species adapted to a different diet and habitat. Extinction is also a natural process. The fossil record shows that more than 99% of species that have ever lived are now extinct. Mass extinctions, events in which a large fraction of species disappear within a geologically short time, have occurred at least 5 times in Earth's history. The most severe, the Permian-Triassic extinction, about 252 million years ago, eliminated roughly 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. The most famous, the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction 66 million years ago, ended the reign of the non-avian dinosaurs and was likely caused by the impact of a large asteroid combined with massive volcanic eruptions. Humans are now driving what some scientists call the 6th mass extinction, primarily through habitat destruction, pollution, climate change, and overhunting. Species are disappearing at rates estimated to be 100 to 1,000 times higher than the background extinction rate. This loss of biodiversity has consequences that extend beyond the intrinsic value of species. Ecosystems provide services, pollination, water purification, carbon sequestration, nutrient cycling, that depend on the interactions among many species. The loss of key species can destabilize ecosystems, reducing their resilience and their ability to support human populations. The study of life reveals principles that apply across scales, from molecules to ecosystems. Information flows from DNA to RNA to protein, but the environment also shapes which genes are expressed and how organisms develop. Cells communicate with one another through signaling molecules, coordinating their activities to form tissues and organs. Organisms interact with each other and their environment, forming ecological networks of competition, predation, mutualism, and decomposition. Energy flows through these networks, captured by photosynthesis and dissipated as heat, while nutrients cycle through biotic and abiotic components. Understanding life at this level of detail does not diminish its wonder. If anything, it amplifies it. Each cell is more complex than any machine humans have built, yet it assembles itself from simple molecules following rules encoded in its genome. Each organism is the latest link in an unbroken chain of descent stretching back 4 billion years, shaped by the slow, iterative process of evolution. We are related quite literally to every other living thing, connected by shared ancestry, shared biochemistry, and shared dependence on this small blue planet orbiting an ordinary star. The Earth is old. Rocks from Australia and Canada have been dated to more than 4 billion years, and the planet itself is about 4.54 billion years old, formed from the disk of gas and dust that surrounded the young sun. In its earliest days, Earth was a molten world, bombarded by asteroids and comets, gradually cooling as it radiated heat into space. The Moon formed around 4.5 billion years ago, likely from debris ejected when a Mars-sized object collided with the early Earth. This impact tilted Earth's axis, giving rise to seasons, and the Moon's gravitational pull stabilized that tilt, moderating climate variations over geological time. Water arrived early, delivered by comets and water-rich asteroids, or possibly outgassed from the planet's interior through volcanic activity. By 4 billion years ago, oceans had formed, and the stage was set for the emergence of life. The exact conditions under which life began remain uncertain, but the essential ingredients were present: liquid water, organic molecules, and sources of energy such as lightning, ultraviolet radiation, and hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. Laboratory experiments have shown that amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, can form spontaneously under conditions resembling those of the early Earth. The first life forms were likely simple, single-celled organisms resembling modern bacteria. They obtained energy through chemical reactions rather than photosynthesis, exploiting the gradients of temperature and chemistry found near hydrothermal vents. Photosynthesis evolved later, around 3.5 billion years ago, when cyanobacteria developed the ability to capture sunlight and split water molecules, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. Initially, this oxygen reacted with dissolved iron in the oceans, forming rust-coloured sediments called banded iron formations. But as these sinks became saturated, oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere. The Great Oxidation Event, occurring about 2.4 billion years ago, transformed the planet. Oxygen is highly reactive, and its rise posed a crisis for most life at the time, which had evolved in an oxygen-free environment. Many organisms went extinct, but others adapted, developing metabolic pathways that could harness oxygen's chemical potential. Aerobic respiration, which uses oxygen to extract far more energy from organic molecules than anaerobic processes, became possible. This innovation paved the way for more complex life forms, which require the high energy output that aerobic respiration provides. Complex cells, eukaryotes, appeared around 2 billion years ago. These cells contain nuclei and organelles, and are capable of forming multicellular organisms. For much of Earth's history, life remained microscopic. Multicellular life did not become widespread until the Ediacaran period, around 600 million years ago, when soft-bodied organisms resembling quilted mattresses and fronds appeared in the oceans. The Cambrian explosion, beginning about 541 million years ago, saw a rapid diversification of animal body plans, including most of the major groups that exist today: arthropods, mollusks, echinoderms, chordates. Life colonized land around 470 million years ago, starting with plants and fungi, followed by arthropods, and eventually vertebrates. The transition from water to land required numerous adaptations: waterproof skins to prevent desiccation, structural support to counteract gravity, lungs or other mechanisms for extracting oxygen from air, and reproductive strategies that did not rely on water for fertilization. The first land plants were small and simple, but by the Carboniferous period, about 350 million years ago, vast forests of ferns and early trees covered the continents, drawing down atmospheric carbon dioxide and contributing to a global cooling that led to extensive glaciation. Dinosaurs dominated terrestrial ecosystems for over 160 million years, from the late Triassic through the end of the Cretaceous. They were extraordinarily diverse, ranging from small feathered theropods to massive sauropods weighing dozens of tons. Birds are their direct descendants, the only lineage of dinosaurs to survive the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction. Mammals, which had existed as small, mostly nocturnal creatures throughout the Mesozoic, diversified rapidly after the extinction event, filling ecological niches left vacant by the dinosaurs. Humans are relative newcomers. The genus Homo appeared about 2.8 million years ago in Africa. Our species, Homo sapiens, evolved around 300,000 years ago, distinguished by a large brain, complex language, and an unparalleled capacity for symbolic thought and cultural transmission. For most of our history, we lived as hunter-gatherers, in small mobile groups, subsisting on wild plants and animals. The development of agriculture about 12,000 years ago in several independent regions marked a turning point, enabling larger, settled populations and the rise of cities, writing, and complex societies. The impact of humans on the planet has accelerated dramatically in recent centuries. The Industrial Revolution, beginning in the late 18th century, harnessed fossil fuels to power machinery, transforming economies and enabling exponential growth in population and resource consumption. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have risen from about 280 parts per million before the industrial era to over 420 parts per million today, primarily due to the burning of coal, oil, and natural gas. This increase traps more heat in the atmosphere, driving global warming and altering climate patterns, sea levels, and weather extremes. The evidence for human-caused climate change is overwhelming. Temperature records show that the past decade was the warmest on record. Glaciers are retreating, polar ice is melting, and sea levels are rising at an accelerating rate. Ocean temperatures are increasing, causing coral bleaching and disrupting marine ecosystems. Extreme weather events, heat waves, droughts, floods, hurricanes, are becoming more frequent and severe. These changes are consistent with predictions made by climate models based on well-established physics, and they pose significant risks to ecosystems, agriculture, water supplies, and human communities. Yet Earth has experienced far more dramatic changes in its past. During the Cryogenian period, between 720 and 635 million years ago, the planet may have been entirely covered in ice, a snowball Earth, due to a runaway feedback loop in which expanding ice sheets reflected more sunlight, cooling the planet further. Life survived in pockets near volcanic vents or beneath the ice, and eventually volcanic CO2 accumulated in the atmosphere, warming the planet enough to melt the ice and restore liquid oceans. Earth recovered, and life rebounded. The planet is resilient, but resilience has limits. What distinguishes the current crisis from past changes is the speed at which it is occurring. Natural climate shifts typically unfold over thousands or millions of years, giving species time to adapt or migrate. Human-driven climate change is happening over decades, faster than many species can respond. Combined with habitat destruction, pollution, and overexploitation, the result is a rapid loss of biodiversity that threatens the stability of ecosystems and the services they provide. Understanding Earth as a system, a dynamic, interconnected network of atmosphere, oceans, land, ice, and life, is essential for addressing these challenges. The carbon cycle links the biosphere and geosphere, moving carbon between the atmosphere, oceans, rocks, and living organisms over timescales ranging from days to millions of years. The water cycle distributes fresh water across the planet, driven by solar energy and shaped by topography and vegetation. The nitrogen cycle, mediated by bacteria that convert atmospheric nitrogen into forms usable by plants, supports the productivity of ecosystems. Human activities have altered all of these cycles, often with unintended consequences. Science provides the tools to understand these systems and to predict the outcomes of different actions. Climate models, validated against past climate data and current observations, project the range of possible futures depending on how much greenhouse gas we emit. These projections are not certainties. They are probabilistic forecasts, bounded by uncertainties in feedbacks, tipping points, and human choices. But the overall trajectory is clear. Continued emissions will drive further warming, with impacts that grow more severe the longer action is delayed. The challenge is not primarily technical. The technologies needed to reduce emissions, renewable energy, energy efficiency, sustainable agriculture, reforestation, already exist and are becoming more affordable. The challenge is social and political, coordinating action across nations, industries, and communities, balancing immediate costs against long-term benefits, addressing inequities in vulnerability and responsibility. It requires acknowledging that we are part of a larger system, that our actions have consequences beyond ourselves, and that the decisions we make now will shape the world for generations to come. There is something humbling and galvanizing about seeing Earth from space, as astronauts have described, a small, fragile sphere suspended in darkness, its thin atmosphere the only barrier between life and the void. From that perspective, the arbitrary divisions of nation and culture fade, and what remains is a shared home, a common origin, and a collective responsibility. We are made of stardust, yes, but we are also made of Earth, its water, its minerals, its atmosphere. Our bodies are composed of elements forged in stars, but they are assembled here, sustained by the intricate web of life that covers this planet's surface. The story of the universe, from the Big Bang to the present, is a story of increasing complexity, from quarks and leptons to atoms, from atoms to molecules, from molecules to cells, from cells to organisms, from organisms to ecosystems, from ecosystems to a biosphere capable of reflecting on its own existence. We are not observers standing outside this process. We are participants, embedded within it, products of it, and now, perhaps, stewards of it. The atoms in your hand were once inside a star. The oxygen you breathe was produced by ancient cyanobacteria. The neurons firing in your brain as you read these words are the result of billions of years of evolution, shaped by natural selection operating on random mutations. You are, simultaneously, a collection of particles obeying physical laws, and a conscious being capable of asking why those laws exist. This is not a contradiction, but a testament to the richness of reality, a universe that can produce minds capable of comprehending it, if only partially, if only briefly. We stand at a moment in history where our species has acquired the knowledge and the power to alter the planet on geological scales, but not yet the wisdom to do so responsibly. That wisdom must be learned, and it begins with understanding the processes that govern the universe, the systems that sustain life, and the interconnections that bind us to each other and to the earth. This understanding, grounded in science and tempered by humility, offers a path forward, not towards certainty or perfection, but toward a future in which we live more thoughtfully, more sustainably, and more aware of our place in the cosmos.